Hi, everyone. This is Evan Shapiro, your host for Streaming Media Connect. Welcome to our next panel, which is Sportsbook Streaming, Microbetting and Other Factors Driving Ultra-Low Latency Streaming. Before we get into the panel with our excellent host and panelists, I want to remind you that we're giving away a $50 Amazon gift card in every panel. You have to be here at the end of the session in order to win. You also have to be the first who's still there who gets the right name of song and the band who created the music you were just listening to. So put that in the chat. And if you're not first, maybe someone got it wrong or they won't be here at the end, but everyone's going to be here because this is going to be a riveting panel. Put your chat in the chat, put your guesses there, put other comments there. But at the end, about 15 minutes before the end of this panel, our moderator is going to throw to Q&A, and there should be Qs in the Q&A. If there are no Qs, there will be few As. That's just how it goes. So try to put your chat in the chat and your questions in the Q&A. Just a reminder that all the sessions from today and all 3 days of Streaming Media East are going to be on Streaming Media's YouTube page next week. The link is in the chat right now. I want to thank our sponsor for this panel on Sportsbook streaming. Their name is nanocosmos, which, because it's sportsbook and sports oriented, I think of tiny soccer players, but that's just me. I want to throw it to our great moderator for this, Jason Thibeault from Streaming Video Technology Alliance. Jason?
Yo, Evan, thank you so much for that intro. I need some intro music, it's like boxing music. All right, everybody, hello, welcome. Jason Thibeault, everyone calls me JT, the Executive Director of the Streaming Video Technology Alliance. We are here to talk about ultra-low latency and micro-betting, some really cool topic right now. It's hot, it's exciting. If you're in for it, we're running a live stream simultaneously with this on FanDuel, where we are doing buzzword bingo, so you can guess on the propensity of us to say things like circle back around, WebRTC, and you can place bets on those, and hopefully somebody will get really rich at the end. If only I was serious. But anyway, let's talk about that whole use case. So let's get to introduce our panelists here. We've got 3 panelists that are joining us, real experts in this space, both from the technology and the sort of business side of the house. We'll let them talk about themselves a little bit before we jump into questions. And just to remind you, somewhere around like the 10-minute mark at the end, we'll be turning over to audience questions. So if you've got something that you want to ask these great panelists, definitely keep that in mind, and we'll hopefully get to that near the end of the session. So with that said, why don't we start off with introductions, and we'll kick off with Darcy.
Hey, good to be here, Jason. Darcy Lorincz. I'm currently the Chief Technology Officer at Barrett-Jackson. I'm also the chairman of the board for a company called WT Fast on latency side of gaming, and had a few decades in streaming, so be able to hopefully put some of that experience into words for the audience today.
Awesome, thanks, Darcy. All right, Oliver.
Hello, everybody. Happy to join this discussion. I'm Oliver Lietz, founder and CEO of nanocosmos, based in Berlin. Our product is NanoStream Cloud, an ultra-low latency live streaming platform at a global scale. We're working in several industries, enterprise, town hall, but also gaming and betting. So that's why I'm here, and looking forward to discussing these topics.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Rob.
Hello, thank you for having me on the panel. My name is Robert Reinhardt. I'm from videoRx. I am a consultant first and foremost, but I do lead teams to build out solutions for the clients that come to me. I work with government and Fortune 500 companies alike, currently working on projects with the National Institutes of Health, and helping people build out FFmpeg workflows.
All right, and just an update, I've already won $47 in the micro betting that we have running on FanDuel. Yeah, only that was the case. All right, let's jump into this. So this is, I get talked a lot about, and sort of the role that I play with the SVTA, and we got to talk to a lot of the industry. And ultra low latency is hot, right? People are talking about it for an obvious use case, which is betting, right? So you can't have any lag or latency whatsoever when you're talking about placing bets on something that is happening in real time. So Oliver, maybe you can start us off with an answer to this first question, but like I just said, micro-betting use cases, they need ultra low latency, sort of a must-have. But what is that really? What is ultra low latency? And then what's really required to provide it at scale? And then of course, Darcy and Rob jump in, after Oliver.
Yeah, sure. Let me start with the latency question. So we consider ultra low latency sub 1 second, which is mandatory for betting, gaming, and auctioning use cases, because you need to be as close to real time as possible. And not only for the streaming technology, but you really need to have successful playback at all participants anywhere in the world. So that's an additional challenge on top of the technology for the video itself. Just needs to play everywhere. You need to be available everywhere. Everybody needs to have a running stream, which can be whatever low bitrate stream, 100K, 200K even. So that the diversity between whatever HD leanback scenarios like you are used in TV and OTT scenarios, and these betting scenarios where you have a much smaller video, you have the additional betting elements on the screen. You preferably are working on a mobile phone, so that's all different. So the use cases are a bit different, and it's kind of the traditional betting things on games, but also the in-game betting, which is the micro-betting, which happens during the game, which needs to be real time. And that can be also not only the traditional games like sports, large sports events, but also new types of applications which are created around sports. And the idea of gamification, where you be part of an event where you can bet on, which can be a separate tournament scenario. Things like also several companies are setting up their own kind of leagues for sports betting, which could be basketball, soccer, football, whatever. I just ran into a kind of table tennis scenario, which is also added value with live graphics where the ball is shown, and you can get some statistics out of that, and you can then bet on the next round. So that's all very interesting scenarios. And there are a lot of innovations going on in this area, which go beyond the just stream the OTTs to content and create some new applications around these ideas.
Darcy or Rob, anything to add to that?
I'll jump in. I think the definition of what ultra low latency is can, particularly to microbetting in that sphere, and this was talked about at Stream Media East in Boston just a few months ago, but is really the context of what the event is and how it's being broadcast out on different channels, right? Because you only if there's latency everywhere, then you want those latencies to be somewhat identical to each other. So if a satellite feed could have a greater latency than WebRTC could have, or any other technology to deploy it. So I think whatever the mechanism is that allows you to bet has to be in sync with what everyone else can use to bet with it and how they're going to get their information for it. Clearly, if with sports, you could have someone in the audience that could be informing someone if elsewhere, like, hey, this just happened, and you could probably work out a system where if you didn't have your latencies all lined up, where people could cheat, and that's what you potentially want to avoid, right? Or I should say potentially, you definitely want to avoid people being able to cheat in a micro-betting scenario so that they can't win with prior knowledge. And so obviously the easiest way to do that is to just make sure keep latency as low as possible, right? And just keep that consistent across all of your delivery devices.
Anything to add there, Darcy, from your experiences with Barrett-Jackson and auctions?
Well, there's been plenty of companies that have tried to normalize the latency across different inputs and outputs, and I think the challenge is still going. But if you're consuming under a second, chances that satellite's going to beat that are pretty slim to none, and same with broadcast. So I think streaming's kind of leapfrogged over those other mediums, and I think that's the standard for the lowest latency today, obviously.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I've had conversations with some big sort of live sports, we'll call them broadcasters. But what they've started to do is bifurcate their architectures, right? So they're giving HLS to the folks that are not betting, and as soon as somebody wants to start betting, they switch over to a WebRTC feed. So you're not overburdening your WebRTC infrastructure with the scale of everybody, because WebRTC is going to require a specialized media server. It's not just an HTTP server. So you're going to have different infrastructure, and that's a scale issue. And so I've heard a number of sports broadcasters talk about this sort of bifurcated workflow, but that leads us actually into our next question, which is about WebRTC, right? We've so I know that somebody right now is betting on me on how many times I can say WebRTC. So the question we often hear about WebRTC is about WebRTC being used WebRTC for cases like live WebRTC streaming, where WebRTC microbetting is WebRTC needed. There, so okay, that person's really happy. I've just blown the odds out of the water, and they won a bunch of money. So, Rob, maybe you can answer this for us first. Is WebRTC the only option available for ultra low latency streaming? We got LLHLS and low latency dash and some other stuff. Give us your thoughts.
My short answer to that is no, it doesn't need to be WebRTC. But there's a lot of maybes and buts in there too, right? Because again, it really depends on how your audience is interacting with that event and what the time frame is they have to react to it. There's different ideas around microbetting and how it's implemented. There's like the time to react and place the bet, as well as the scale of the bet, right? Like how much money are you betting versus how much you're not. I would say, and just to throw Oliver a bone here with nanocosmos, WebSockets is a perfectly fine technology. There's other vendors in that space like Vindrel and that are doing WebSockets as well. Anyone who's in that space of trying to scale ultra low latency knows that there's a lot of problems with WebRTC, right? I mean, there's firewall issues, especially if you want to use a mobile device. You might have transport issues with WebRTC on depending on what kind of network you're on. Whereas things that can just punch through most firewalls without a problem, like WebSockets, you're not going to have that connectivity issue off the bat. I would also say that we've advanced to a point now where data synchronization can happen very quickly outside of streaming in general, right? And so if we're talking about a data layer where transaction is happening, that definitely doesn't have to happen over WebRTC. And a lot of I've seen scenarios, not necessarily in microbetting, but where real-time transactions have to happen. WebRTC might be there for AV, but they might be using something else for the data transaction, right? Like a WebSocket or something else. So there are variations that will work. And again, if synchronization is more important, like the audience is all on the same page, regardless of latency of what's actually happening in the real event, then you have a number of options there. I know the Livery, for example, has their own custom CMF manifest that will align data and deliver it very consistently across live presentations and events. So there's other options out there for sure.
Over. Darcy,
Yeah, I agree that we don't need WebRTC for all use cases. We also don't use it for delivery. It is a valid technology for certain use cases. Rob already described the challenges in scale, etc., firewalls. It also has some challenges in adaptive bitrate playback scenarios, which doesn't adjust so well. So if you have network congestion, you run into the same issues you have everywhere, like in traditional streaming. And so that's why we purposely decided not to use that for delivery. We use HTTPS-based delivery. And there are new technologies which are emerging, like QUIC and HTTP3, which also are quite promising, web transport and all that stuff, which are more meant to be used for large-scale distribution. But I want to point out that it's not only the technology you need to decide on, it's more like the comprehensive solution you need then, because when you want to do something with WebRTC, for example, you have that browser stack, it's available in every browser, but creating a technology and an application around that for distribution is really a big challenge. So you usually need a kind of CDN and partner which provides the right architecture and components to have that scalable system already in place. Otherwise, you just end up to develop, create a lot of things you need to develop then So there are a lot of constraints around that, and it's not only the delivery technology. And I would also maybe connect to the former question again, that synchronizing everything in the delivery side, I think it's basically impossible, because you would never be able to get to real time for broadcast and OTT scenarios. And you don't need to. So because you have that lean back scenario, you just want to enjoy the highest quality on your 4K screen, maybe. And it's just a different use case when you go to real-time activities and interaction. You always interact when you do something on a screen, you type something, you have additional applications around that. And as you said, Jason, that might be a switch from a HLS distribution then to real-time distribution, which is somehow also a usability challenge, but that's things which you can differentiate to create great usable applications and make that available to your audiences, and then monetize it, of course.
Yes, absolutely. Darcy, what are your thoughts? I mean, obviously, Barrett-Jackson is not the biggest car auction, definitely the coolest. How are you guys experiencing, either WebRTC or other protocols with trying to deliver interactivity across the web in real time?
Yeah, it's definitely challenging inside of a live event, because we're trying to keep the lights on and the power and everything else at the same time. But multi-CDN, we have to go that way always. We haven't found anybody that's singularly going to give us every geography or every thing we need. So I think, people need to consider more than one CDN, and at least in our case, because we can't have our feed go down. And obviously all the other things that are happening with fantasy bidding and real bidding and other micro things happening, and data overlays, which we're going to talk about in a second, all have an impact on the quality of the service.
Yeah, it's interesting too, is that like when you guys keep bringing up these topics like multi-CDN, which, that makes total sense. But then that brings up a whole host of other issues, like that goes to what Oliver was saying in terms of a switch or change happening at the player. So now you have content steering. Which CDN do I send this request to? And how do I manage that? Is it server side? Is it client side? Is it a bit both? HLS has recently built in content steering into their spec, and Dash has as well. And there's now multi-CDN options for players and server side. And it's all of these other little technical considerations jump out just because somebody says, we should use multi-CDN, which is the most logical thing somebody could say when you're delivering a live event and you want to make sure everything is resilient and scalable and reliable. It's very funny as you sort of peel back the layers of the onion, you keep exposing new challenges that cause concerns. And actually leads me right into the next question, which Darcy, hoping you can lead us off on this one, but it's about latency, right? So latency is, I think people are like, oh, you just have this one latency. It's when I push a button and then I get a response, and that's it. But there's so much more involved in the streaming workflow. So, given your experience and what you guys are trying to accomplish at Barrett-Jackson, what is the state of latency in real-time streaming today for use cases like betting and things like that? Are we doing well, or is it still sucking?
Oh, it's definitely getting better. I mean, I said I had been here for 30 years in this business, so I can tell you back in the day to compare to now, there's night and day. But I think we're still making incremental things happen in this business, and everybody that comes in adds something to the either it's an investment from the capital market that creates more bandwidth and more availability, or it's some awareness, like gaming obviously continues to be a thing. And now we have all these other overlays and AR and VR and you name it, which are all creating challenges, but also opportunities, because people want those experiences and they're willing to pay for it. And I guess that kind of comes down to two ends. What do we pay for on the contribution side, and what do they pay for on the last mile where they're consuming? Because in a lot of cases, those are still going to be the barrier to having some normalization. So I guess that I don't want to jump right to normalization on those other questions there, but to try to fix that for all those decades. We're getting better at it. I think you said, across multi-CDNs, and of course now you have a problem because they don't support it in the same way. But I see a world where if we can equalize to the norm, then that's as good as we can get today. And some of the people won't be able to participate. That's what you have to actually say is it okay that somebody halfway across the world isn't going to be part of the fantasy bid or be a microbetting because they're just too far outside of being able to be equalized, if you will. So, and then we have the payload of the content itself. We have the gameplay happening, and it's all happening in that same, player or in that same browser. So there's a lot of load in things that we don't control. So we constantly have to look at those companies and say who's better than who, and they're always improving. If you want to follow the money, follow betting, you're going to find where probably the most efforts are in terms of solving these problems.
That's interesting. Rob, any thoughts to add to that?
It's such a this is the question of what is the state of latency today. Yeah, it's such an open question and a big question. Yeah, I like Darcy. We've been around in this industry for a long time now and seen, we've come a long way. I haven't been in it for 30 years, but 20 years for sure. Well, 24 or 5. Who's counting now? But in internet years, I don't know what's the multiplier for internet years because it's got to be a times 5.
Every internet year is like
that's
7
right.
years in real.
Exactly. Compared to most other technologies, I used to joke with students that I taught in university for multimedia that I should have stuck with medicine because the human body doesn't change as quickly as technology does. But the yeah, we're seeing advance. I mean, what's interesting to me, and we just talked about it already with WebSockets, is that we can still harness the power and improve upon technologies that have been around that predate streaming. I mean, WebSockets have been around for a long, long time, and so it's really, I think, just a matter of really thoroughly studying the use case and having the resources put at it that are going to solve it and have all the contingencies line up, right? Specifically with multi-CDN, right? Because as Darcy said, they're, each one's going to do it a little bit differently. So your playback tech and your interactive layers all have to be able to switch over to whatever mode they might need to for that CDN and adapt to it. So I think if I'm just going to use that term, the adaptability of latency is getting better, right? We're getting closer to standards. WebRTC is one of the closest standards we have that we can work with, and I think that's why it's talked about more than WebSockets, because nanocosmos has their own implementation of WebSockets. It's not like, and WebRTC still has a long way to go. I've written about it before for Stream Media Magazine. In fact, I powwowed with the original co-founder of Millicast before Dolby bought it, Dr. Alex, about how, man, it'd be nice if WebRTC had similar frameworks around it that Adobe had for RTMP and that made it consistent, right? I mean, there's a reason why we're still all using RTMP for ingest pretty widely, right? It's an easy standard that became a de facto standard, and it's universal, and that's not the same for all these playback techs. So I would say the state of latency is still a can of worms because you do have to do so much. I'm hoping 5 years from now we'll be better at having maybe some better standards around low latency so that it's not so complicated to have a team of devs build out playback tech that's going to do exactly what you need to do.
We now have an over-under bet for Rob on 5 years that latency has improved.
I did forget to mention, we create a lobby for anybody who wants to bet. So we are creating an intermediary step. If you're not in the lobby and you're just watching, then we don't care. Obviously we care you have a great experience, but if you're going to bet or you're going to be part of a bidding process, that is in between. So we actually do all of our magic there, not relying entirely on first, last mile or the network that we have for that particular location.
That would reduce a lot of the infrastructure scale requirements because you're going to have only a small portion of your population in that sort of bidding lobby.
Yep.
Yeah. So Oliver, what are your thoughts on this? Latency, come on.
Yeah, it's of course it's an interesting topic, and you can talk hours about that. But what we've learned is that content providers and platform operators just want to achieve their results by providing the content as fast as possible and really to everywhere in the world. So every remote location is valid, and they just want to monetize that all across the globe. And that's really challenging. So when you want to build up that yourself, you have that multi-CDN approach and content steering, which you mentioned, which is possible. But then you have the different CDN providers, you have the player, you have the ingest. You need to decide on all these different protocols and bring that all together somehow. And then what happens if things go wrong? You need to go to several instances and have a look where the error might come from. So our learning from is, and what other vendors are also doing, is covering, or at least trying to cover, the technology in a unified comprehensive solution, which then is made available so you can, and the content providers can focus on monetizing their content and don't need to worry too much about the video technology. Still, you need to have a proper camera setup, etc., and provide the right encoder. But that's it then, basically. And then the decision is then on the platform provider to provide the right service level. And what is usually expected nowadays is 100% SLA. So that's why we are all talking about content steering and multi-CDN, that if anything fails, it automatically fails over, switches to secondary distribution, etc. And that's things which I think which makes sense to be covered in a platform which covers all that, and then which covers the decision which protocol to use and which device, etc. And that a bit to make it more usable.
No, absolutely. I mean, at the SVTA, we have a live streaming working group that actually put out a paper about best practices and live stream latency. Sort of what they discovered was just latency up and down the workflows. So many little points that can cause more latency, which can impact use cases like microbetting. Even if you're using WebRTC or WebSockets or HTTP3 or media over quick, it doesn't matter. If your upstream workflow is congested with latency at various spots, you're going to get latency from the camera, from glass to glass, right? It's sort of unavoidable. One of the interesting use cases I've heard for reducing latency is actually in arena betting. And so we're starting to see a lot of the US arenas, and I think there are some in Europe as well, that are getting lit up with 5G ultra-wideband. And so once you have the 5G ultra-wideband, you're in this enclosed environment. There are people watching the match on their phone at the same time they're there because they want to see different camera angles or they want to place bets. And so now you have this perfect sort of petri dish, if you will, of a place to offer micro betting, because you do reduce some of that last mile latency that, to be honest, the only people that can control that are the network operators. So I've heard this use case quite a bit. It's actually really interesting. I've yet to see it really play out at a big scale. But I know that that's something that a lot of the betting folks are excited about in terms of having some sort of captive audience that can do micro betting. Oliver, I'm gonna ask you this follow-up question based on what you were talking about. So, obviously, latency is a problem, right? It is a problem that needs to be addressed. It's sometimes going to be great, sometimes bad. You can do a lot of dial, knob turning and flip switching to get it better, but that's not the only technical challenge for supporting use cases like microbetting. So can you talk a little bit about what your thoughts are and sort of what are some of the other technical challenges that a provider of microbetting might face in addition to latency?
Yeah, that's connecting to what I just said, to have the full infrastructure, that you have the ingest platform, the ingest locations available as close to the event, but also the playout locations. So you need a CDN which covers the network, which makes things available without any hiccups. And then you need to have, of course, the availability, but also some insight on the transport. So there are always cases when things go wrong. So you have network congestions anywhere on the workflow. Part of the audience might get whatever lower quality, etc. And you need to identify where it's coming from. So is it coming from the camera, from the ingest? Is it coming from the middle mile, from the CDN? Or is it coming from the last mile, to the end user? And to get that insight, you need some metrics and correlate that somehow on an analytics platform. So that's also what vendors are more and more providing and integrate into their platforms to enable more transparency and give more insight into the quality of service. It's not only the latency, but also the buffering, video quality, etc., for every user out in the world. And things like security, we probably also touched then, which is also part of the game.
We are going to talk about that. Absolutely. Security is definitely a big concern. Rob, what are some of your thoughts on some of the other technical challenges of enabling these kinds of use cases like microbetting?
I think vetting, it was already brought up, but it's been in the back of my mind ever since it was brought up, is just vetting the connection that the person has right away. Like, 'cause not Darcy brought it up. Like, not everyone may be able to participate based on what they have, right? And I think not that's not an answer stakeholders want to hear, that there's going to be a limitation potentially of people who can participate. But as this industry grows, there's going to be a lot of money involved in it, and you don't want to necessarily, have things go wrong. And so I think Darcy mentioned in the lobby, it made me start thinking about even when I was building out years ago, just AV solutions that had to be real time before Zoom and other conferencing software solutions were out there. We would always have to vet whether or not someone had the bandwidth to even push video, right? And if you couldn't, then sorry, you're not going to be able to even try to turn on your camera, right? It won't even be an option to turn on the camera. I remember one of the first streaming players that I built with broadcast when I was VP of multimedia applications at Schematic was for ABC's first full episode streaming player. That was when Lost and Desperate Housewives was about, and they specifically didn't want to have anything under 800 kilobits. And that was a long time ago, right? I mean, and 800 kilobits was a pretty high bar for the lowest common denominator, right? And the player would just say, sorry, you don't have enough bandwidth to even support our lowest quality. You're not going to be able to participate in this. So I only use that as a comparable to what I think is, going to be interesting when it comes to just how successful microbetting becomes integrated in greater environments. I really think what you brought up, Justin, earlier. Sorry, Jason, not Justin. Your T and your
Everyone
Thibeault.
calls me Justin.
I know. I get called Richard all the time, so you can call me Richard if you want to get back at me. But that's right. There you go. Well, you brought it up, Jason, earlier with the 5G ultra band. That I think that's gonna be the first nice big step, right? I know Phoenix has been partnered with Verizon with the multi-camera views with Verizon at stadium events. So I think that makes a lot of sense to me, because you're removing a whole lot of uncertainty there. If everyone has the same last mile connection, then you're going to have a lot of guarantee behind what's happening there. So, and I think when it comes to the greater audience and the greater global audience and whatever internet connection they might have, and that's just it. I mean, even our 4G and 5G connections aren't static. I can move in this house and my connection's going to change, right? So and I think that's, as a developer myself, a coder, I know that one of the most overlooked areas of development tends to be in error detection in general, or error handling. And so, just because you were vetted at the beginning of an experience doesn't mean that you're going to be good throughout the experience, and that you have to continually check in with that client to make sure that they're still satisfying all the conditions that you initially had going in, right? So, and those are the kind of dotting your I's and crossing your T's that I see overlooked, usually with smaller scale projects where they're trying to enter into the foray of building out solutions that require more resources to be successful with it.
Darcy, any thoughts to add to that?
Gaming has really changed the game for us. What you were just saying about real-time measurement of everybody that's in a session, every millisecond, as much as you can do. So even if they're moving around their house, you still know the conditions, and if they fall outside of the rules, then they get disconnected, or you have to give them a message. But I do like 5G. I think, it takes first and last mile and middle mile and everything and puts it into one technology band. Doesn't mean it's great yet, but when we see gamers playing and they're connected to a Verizon or AT&T or a Singtel 5G network, then there is no, there's no CPE in the home that's creating some latency. The other thing I can tell you that encryption is a bugger when it comes to and of course privacy and security and everything comes in when you're talking about money. So when you add encryption in, now you got a whole other layer of stuff to worry about, and depends on who the provider is. So you still have a lot of things happening, but I still like the idea that we're going to have some homogeneous network, and we've got enough network touch points now. We can measure things in real time as well as deliver in real time. So I think it's getting better, and gaming has made all that happen. Every one of these tournaments that happens and these remote gamers, and there's millions of dollars on the line. We had to figure that stuff out, and we're just seeing more of that gaming technology become more of the streaming world. And I'm thank God for gaming and all the money and people that are in it. So
no, that's interesting, and it's I guess we should thank gaming for a little bit for WebRTC, right? So they were using WebRTC for real-time chat and engagement for a long time, and made its way into streaming. So thank you, gaming. Darcy, you had mentioned something earlier, and I just want to follow up with this about sort of data overlay. You'd said a couple times sort of mixed reality, AR, and what kind of complications do you think that might cause with ultra-low latency streaming?
Gamification of the experience is the first piece. The audience for us used to be older folks, so they were satisfied with leaning back and pushing a button to do some fantasy bid or some other transaction, and now they need more. Just what they're actually micro betting on is what the outcome, not outcome anymore. It's what's happening in real time. Is it a pass left or right? Is it going to be is that car going to be in a game going left or right on a passing on a curve? In our world, things are pretty static in terms of the experience. It's the car sitting on a stage. So, but all the overlays that tell you the data, the statistics, tell you the previous 10 cars and the next 10 cars and all the build sheets, and we have overlays coming out our ears. Those are all now being delivered in that same payload, and so they have pressure. But that has to be there in order to give the user experience, so they actually have something to bet on. Stats is the main driver, and stats for us and data, we have to overlay it, and it also has to look pretty. It can't just be numbers. It's got to be in a container, and that's graphics. So every one of those things adds a little bit more of the payload, and how they consume it. It's interactive too, so they're clicking on things, they're doing things in real time, and it's a lot of web stuff, like you said, WebRTC and WebAR, and they all have to overlay at the same time in that player. So the browsers have gotten better. So I'm happy that the browser people woke up a few years ago, and if you can pick the right browser at the right time, you're doing all right. But I think that the layers aren't in a master control. It's not a Chiron system. It's things coming in from all these different data systems and all these overlays, and the user themselves having the chat window and doing something on the side that's also consuming their bandwidth. It's all adding to the latency. So you have to, again, be measuring all those elements within that browser and making sure it all stays within whatever your delivery window is for time and latency. And we didn't talk about jitter and all the other stuff, but it's all there. And this was a bear to deal with 5-10 years ago. Again, I go back to gaming. It has really solved a lot of it, because the gaming networks and Twitch and all those things that went out at scale brought a lot of investment into the networks, and we were all able to benefit from that. So I think it's going to continue that way, but I think you're just going to see more and more overlays. I'm going to not be wearing the, readers. I'm going to be wearing some overlay glasses that are also tied into my network, so I can see overlays in this thing. So there's so many things coming at us. I think, glad that there's smart people have been around a while that are going to be able to help out, like the folks on this panel.
No, absolutely. So Oliver, obviously nanocosmos, you guys run a delivery platform, and I say platform because it's more than just a delivery network. What do you guys see in terms of stuff that Darcy was talking about in terms of payloads? Are they increasing as more of your customers are adding immersive, interactive stuff? What are you guys seeing? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's actually the typical scenario, that you have additional gamification elements which are somewhat computer generated on the screen. And that's also what I mentioned earlier, that you have a lot of room for innovation here. So you can generate new types of application by generating overlays in an interactive way, in a usable way, to create new types of applications, to add these statistics, what Darcy was mentioning, but also like additional information about the players. additional gamification elements and make some kind of interactive content out of existing content. So that's a great opportunity for new application developers to create really new applications around existing content, and also for the content owners to have additional channels for monetization, which betting is obviously a very good way to monetize your content again. And combining these things with AI, AR, VR elements, gamification elements makes the application then interesting to be part of that and take part in the betting scenarios. And that's all, combine all that together and make it available to everybody in the world. It's of course challenging, but it's also a great opportunity to create some new applications around that.
I mean, you can almost imagine a scenario where, like what Darcy is saying, somebody's wearing, let's just say, AR glasses, they're watching a match in live, right? So they're there at the event or the arena watching it live, and they're seeing data overlays and they're seeing information on players, and they're like, oh, I'm going to bet that guy, let's say it's a basketball match, that guy's he's gonna drive the hoop and slam dunk it. So that process right there of doing something with this new interface that may be atypical. It's not on my phone. I don't know my fingers. It's got other considerations. It'll be interesting to see how these payloads change over time to deal with these newer devices and modalities that are coming out to enable people to do what you just said, Oliver, which is gamify and monetize their content more, right? People want to do more with the stuff they have. So it's how do I do that? And one thing I want to return to, and Rob, I've got another question for you right after this. So, but everybody jump in, please, after this. But everyone's brought it up a little bit. It's security, right? So obviously, security, ultra low latency, you have to secure that content as much as you have to secure it with non-real time or sort of, even just low latency stuff via HTTP or something like that. How do you do this? So Oliver, what are some of the technical considerations to be made when trying to secure content that is being delivered ultra low latency in order to support use cases like microbetting?
It's a more and more important topic we hear from many of our customers, because you open up the content distribution to anybody in the world. So you want to encourage everybody to join, and that means everybody could also be a kind of pirating approach and misuse the content, and that's what you want to avoid, and that's a challenge. So it's usually in microbetting and low latency streaming, you don't usually use traditional DRM scenarios and technologies. It's more like misuse detection, kind of token-based security encryption things, which create a seamless experience in the application. And detecting these kinds of attacks and misuse scenarios is always challenging if you don't have the data. So having the right data information from all players, but also from the CDN to be able to detect misuse is then very important to lock certain users out who might copy the content and misuse it for their own betting scenarios or so. Because the challenge is there that you also use that for gray and whatever non-valid betting scenarios, which is happening all around the globe in sports a lot, actually. And that's a great challenge to reduce the level of misuse here, and that's in these scenarios.
Rob, any thoughts on security?
Yeah, there's security's got, again, is this part of your betting pool right now? Is there so many layers to that onion? I don't know if onion or is. Oh, well, there you go. But there's lots of layers to that, and again, depending on just what the business requirements are going to be around it, I think Oliver and Darcy both said it, that your traditional DRM encryption, it may not be enough. You may need something that's more than AES 128 encryption around your payloads, and more layers around it, not just in your transports and being secure with your transports, but just how much you're doing to make sure that the data itself is being encrypted to a level. In my past consulting, I brought I mean, it's not an exact one-to-one, but I have back when Flash clients were popular, I was hired to audit code to make sure it adhered to state gambling regulations, and that not so much equivalent to microbetting, but I think microbetting is so new that even from a regulation point of view, we don't really have a whole lot in place yet. It's growing, and I think it's probably it's depending on what side of the fence you stand on there for regulation or not. Again, there's just not a standard set of protocols around just what it means to be secure and what it means not to be secure, right? It's such a new field that every implementation is going to be different, I feel. So.
And Darcy, I mean, as a content owner, right? You obviously have to grapple with this directly. How are you guys addressing security for especially for that content that is being used by folks to place bids on auctions?
Yeah, it comes back to the lobby. They authenticate into that during that session. We measure everything, including making sure they're the legitimate person that said who they are, their fingerprint. Trying to train machines to look for anomalies instead of using DRM in the traditional ways. That's a thing today. So we have been doing some of that and looking for patterns that are changing on individuals or on during a session. So that's, I think, the machine learning part of things is growing fast, and being able to throw GPUs out there in the network at problems might be something. We're definitely seeing some of that on the quality side for ourselves. And that's the other thing. We have to deliver quality at the same time. Nobody wants to bid on a car if they can't see it. So you have no option not to show them the most beautiful version of that car or that vehicle while they're pushing the button up to millions of dollars. So somebody comes in and hijacks that transaction. A lot of money can be lost on our side, and a lot of people can get angry pretty fast if they lose that bid or something happens. So we want to make sure machines learn the patterns of individuals and of the auction in general, and look for anomalies in quality, look for anomalies in connection, where it's coming from. Encryption, yeah, I don't think it's caught up to the micro stuff we're talking about. So you have to take care of that at that lobby level right now, but I think machines are going to bring it closer to us.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know, again, from just having conversations in the industry, that there was a very disturbing trend by pirates to basically put fake apps in app stores that mimicked exactly the legitimate app. And so people would download the mimic app not knowing that they had downloaded a mimic app. They were getting the content they wanted because the pirate was stealing the content into their app. But anything that happened on top of that, subscription, betting, anything, was just going to the pirate. And it's just like, kind of what you said. I think all three of you have said this. Is really, you have to stay on top of this. It's not like, oh, look, we just secure it once. We're good. All right. Got that. Check that box. Okay, let's move on to something else. It's like constantly have to address encryption and security. Like, you have to stay on top of it. Having machines do some of that heavy lifting seems like such a natural application of that technology. So
yeah, the bid is a transaction, so it's very lightweight. So we're not talking about the whole payload here. That bid button, if something happens there, and it could be just, hey, somebody hijacked it, that layer of your experience. Yeah, they could be bidding and send the money somewhere else. So you've just really got to look at those exact elements of your experience and say that's the most important element. And we're going to watch for anomalies, and that's where we're applying machine learning right now.
All right. So before we turn to some audience questions, we've got a couple. I want to talk about one big topic we have not touched on that you guys have all mentioned, which is money. Right. So microbetting is about money. Obviously, money is changing hands. I'm placing a bet. I want to win money back. Chances are I'm going to lose my money, but there's still money going somewhere. But obviously, there's payment to deal with, right? So in some cases, it might be payment at the time of transaction, might be payment other times. And so, Rob, maybe you can start us off with this one. But how does the choice of payment impact the latency of the overall experience? And you're talking sub-second, and you've got the process of payment. Does the choice of payment types impact that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, clearly, I and Darcy probably has more current information on this. I'm doing a lot of experimentation with an R&D group with Lightning payments into real-time transactions, because Lightning as a cryptocurrency can be processed way faster than Bitcoin. But it's not the kind of thing that you want to make sure they have the money like while they're bidding, right? Most of the time you want to make sure that there is something there to be given, so that you're not dealing with people who don't have funds to actually support what they're saying they have. And so I know a lot of things I think can work like NFT models, where like if you're buying an NBA trading card, that's not a micro bet, but you can use a credit card to basically buy. In some cases it's crypto, but on a lot of places have their own proprietary point system, right? You buy points that equate to a certain dollar amount, and then that way the vendor, who's ever in that arena, can be using those points on their own data backend without having to involve third parties to confirm whether or not that currency is available, right? And but I, even though I had the question and I added it to the list, it was more to hear the others on the panel talk about it. So I want to hear Darcy and Oliver's comments on that.
Yeah, let's open this up. Let's go to Darcy first, and then we'll go to Oliver. Darcy.
We're not at a place yet where people show up and it's ad hoc, really, to be honest. So the problem isn't prevalent, but we like to have more people the opportunity to bid, or to have a fantasy bid, which is sort of like play to earn. And definitely anything that's digital, it's going to be better than verifying their bank account with a letter and all the other ACH and payment methods that are out there. But that's still the majority. It's pre-verified. Now that doesn't mean they you verify in 1 second and they took their money out and now it's not available. So we have to constantly be cross-connecting with, is that a legitimate person? Is it, we'll check with the bank. We do a lot of checking. So when you register to bid on a car, you're not a random person. You're either known or verified in advance. So I guess my quick answer is we don't get in that situation in the first place. But if we want to make more available to more people, especially when we start looking at micro ownership. So there is a trend in our business where that car could be owned by a co-op, and that co-op can, if you see in art right now, it's happening in collector business too. So that's a little more intense, because now you got a co-op that has to have validation, and there could be 1,000 people in that co-op that, in that particular car that want to own shares, essentially. So you go back to all the learnings we had in financial markets, and I cut my teeth on high-speed trading way back in the day. And that really is that technology. And again, it's validating, but it's high-speed trading. And when they go within a certain threshold, we'll give some people credit because we know they've been there before. If you're a new person, you don't get as much. So we just have to always know what the boundaries are. But the digital currencies certainly are going to improve a lot of this. But they fluctuate very quickly too. So you also have to be aware of what is the value of that thing in that exact moment, not, in a day or even an hour. That stuff can change so dramatically and it fluctuates so quickly. But I think once, you've seen probably the news that our government's trying to give us all digital bank accounts these days. And, unfortunately, probably going to come sooner than we all like, but I like cash still. But when that happens, it's going to take a lot of that drama off the table, but it's also going to create a lot more opportunity for all kinds of shenanigans in the security world. So long way around say we try and stay away from the problem, but it's still there.
the problem's gonna find you. Oliver.
Yeah, just short, because the others said enough. Actually, digital payment is always a challenge, and there's no solution which is really seamless. So you need to onboard somehow, you need to log in and authenticate. And there are a lot of vendors trying to simplify that process out there, payment processes, be it crypto-based or traditional-based. But that's something which is basically usability-based and can always be improved.
No, absolutely. Okay, well then let's turn to the audience questions. We've got a couple of these. So Oliver, maybe you can lead us off with this first one, especially again, as a delivery platform, you've got a lot of tendrils in different regions of the world. So how much is latency typical in sort of outlier areas outside, let's say, the bigger geos, right, or the bigger major metro markets? And are there problems in areas that don't have good access to live streaming?
Of course, there are different areas which have reduced bandwidth, etc. But our aim is to provide really sub-second latency everywhere. And we try to achieve that by the adaptive bitrate. I also mentioned that we turn quality down then, that you still have a valid live stream running and you can watch the content and be part of that experience. Latency might go a bit up if you have additional challenges like packet loss scenarios, etc. But that's still something you can achieve within around 1 second and stay within the real-time limits somehow.
Yeah, I know that there's, obviously in the US, right, every country has rural areas where there's not great bandwidth. One of the ways that companies have been exploring it in the US is with ATSC 3.0. So there's a certain way you can turn ATSC 3 into something interesting called data casting. And so the tower becomes a way to deliver data instead of a television signal. And so the idea is that you would deliver that stream over ATSC 3.0 to TVs or devices that are chipped for it. And so you would basically be able to deliver people a much better, higher quality stream via that way than the lousy bandwidth they might have from very limited ISPs and trunk access. So there are some, and then there's obviously satellite, right? Look at Starlink, right? Starlink is supposed to have some amazing low latency. So there are definitely ways that are coming around that, CDNs would be using in combination to deliver. So it's really interesting to see some of the things that are being explored right now to deliver higher quality streams, lower latency to places that don't traditionally have really good access. The other question we have is here, and again, Oliver, maybe you can lead us off here, and then I definitely want to hear from everybody else on this as well. Is does piracy, so people pirating live, does that ever affect the latency of the stream for everybody?
No, it doesn't typically. So you have some detection mechanisms, like also Darcy was mentioning. You have some AI automation, machine learning, or manual interventions, which you can see to detect some misuse and lock certain clients out. Plus the additional encryption and security options, which shouldn't increase latency, of course. So it might certain encryption cycles have some turnaround times, which is more in the millisecond range. But as all internet traffic is basically encrypted nowadays over HTTPS, at least there's no big deal in that. So that's usually not limiting latency.
Anybody else want to add to that question, or even the first one too? Just your thoughts on delivering higher quality, lower latency stuff to outlying areas or issues with piracy. If not, I have a really cool question to follow on.
Let's go cool.
Okay. All right. This is my around the horn question. All right. Need a little horn. Have you guys up here? Just gonna go around. We'll start with Darcy. Go to Richard. It's Rob, right? And then we'll end with Oliver. Touche. And here's the question, right? And I love doing this because puts you a little bit on the spot, but it's basically streaming operators coming to you. You're talking about a conversation in a bar, library, deli, coffee shop, whatever. You find out they're a streaming operator, and they're talking about doing low latency, ultra low latency live streaming. You're going to offer microbetting. What is the one piece of advice you would offer them if they asked that and talked about that? Darcy, go.
Piece of advice. I'm a show me guy, so the piece of advice is bring the demo, and don't tell me your story. How many stories I've heard over the years, people solving this problem. So yeah, it's a show me, and in our world, it's easy to do. You just plug me into your network, and I'm going to test you against all the other things I've seen, and like I said, multi-CDN, I'm going to compare you against others, and that's it.
I love that. So your advice to the operator, this person's going to have a live stream, is do your testing, make sure you're performing well. Awesome. Richard, go. Oh wait, it's Rob, go.
Yeah, it's probably right in line with Darcy. I was going to use the words due diligence. Just do your due diligence. to make sure that your business. I say it a lot in all my sessions. Just you got to start with your business requirements and make sure your tech is supporting your business requirements. And so many people don't do that. They especially if they're a small startup or it's. Just right now what I'm doing for my next feature for Stream Media Magazine is comparing low latency vendors, and I'm intentionally leaving names out of it and just saying vendor A, B, and C based on transport. And it's been very interesting to me just to see how the real life testing comes out. Like, just don't, and the due diligence is really the subtext to that is don't trust just what you see in the marketing, right? Because just because someone says they can do something doesn't necessarily mean they can do it or do it as well as you need them to do it.
Okay, Oliver.
Yeah,
Finish
very
your
short.
thought.
I would suggest not to try to build a tech stack themselves, but to find the right partner.
Ooh, I like that. I like it. To who? What partner is Oliver referring? I will leave that for the audience to conclude. Listen, guys, this has been a great panel. It's been really fun. I mean, it's a really important topic. We're going to keep talking about this. I am definitely on the over 5 years. Rob, sorry. I'm going to make some money on that bet. But with that said, thank you, Darcy. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Oliver. You guys have been fantastic, and I will turn it back over to Evan.
Thank you, Jason, for a great panel. Thank you, panelists. Just quickly, Oliver, we did the math. The furthest distance from Medford, New Jersey, which is the home base of streaming media, is Rome is 4,200 miles. Berlin is 3,900 miles. So
wow.
you right now are in
So
second
sad.
place for furthest. I know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So we don't have a winner in Oliver, but we do have a winner. How's that for a segue? On our music trivia question. The band was Booker T and the MGs. The song was "You Keep Me Hanging On," and the winner is Beth Rosen, who has been a stalwart audience member here on Streaming Media Connect this summer. Thank you for that. Beth, someone will reach out to you about that gift card. Again, thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the tiniest soccer players in the world, nanocosmos. And make sure that you stick around for the next panel at which is at 4 o'clock. Sorry, I was just checking the time. Beyond ChatGPT, how AI is transforming streaming workflows and businesses. This is going to be cutting edge conversation at 4 o'clock. Just a reminder, all of the panels from all 3 days of Streaming Media Connect are up on Streaming Media's YouTube page. Link is in the chat, and that'll be up next week. And we will be giving yet another Amazon gift card of $50 away in the next panel. So make sure you check it out. See you in about an hour. Again, thank you, panelists. Thank you, Jason. I'll see you in half an hour.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.